When you finally decide you're done with that cheap budget sub that rattles the trunk but never really feels the beat, you end up with a mix of excitement and dread. You've seen the cheap look cones wobble, the amp hiss, and the whole system end up sounding like a foghorn with no punch. That hesitation wondering whether the next sub will finally give you the depth you crave without turning your car into a vibrating mess is exactly what drove me to dig into the Rockford Fosgate T1D415. I spent a weekend reading forums, watching install videos, and comparing a handful of 15-inch models before I even cracked open the box. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the T1D415 isn't a plug-and-play unit you just toss under a seat and hope for the best. It's a 15-inch, dual 4-ohm sub with Rockford's patented vast, variable angle sonic technology, cone design, which basically means the cone's surface area is larger than a traditional round cone of the same diameter. In plain English, more cone means more air moved per pulse, and that translates into tighter, more defined low frequencies, especially when you're driving a mid-size sedan that doesn't have a massive enclosure already built in. I installed the T1D415 in a 2019 Honda Accord because that's a car where many owners either skip a sub entirely or settle for a shallow, low-power unit. The mounting depth of 8.4 inches is a sweet spot for a vehicle that only has a 6-inch deep trunk cavity. I had to cut a small section out of the trunk floor, but the sub's rear-facing mounting points made the job straightforward. The real test, though, began when I paired it with a 500-watt Class D amp I already owned. In daily driving, the difference is subtle at low speeds but becomes unmistakable on the highway. When a bass-heavy track like Uptown Funk rolls over the speakers, the low end doesn't just boom, it actually feels like a gentle push in the seat, not a harsh vibration that rattles the dashboard. That's where Vast shines. The enlarged cone moves enough air to create a fuller sound without demanding an oversized enclosure or an over-engineered amp. For a commuter who spends an hour each way, the T1D415 adds a noticeable depth without turning the cabin into a shaking box. If you're someone who enjoys blasting EDM at a club-level volume, the T1D415 can still hold its own, but there are trade-offs. The sub's 1-year warranty and Rockford's reputation for sturdy construction give confidence, yet the design isn't aimed at ultra-high SPL, sound pressure level, scenarios where you'd need a massive, purpose-built enclosure and a dedicated multi-amp setup. In other words, if you're planning to build a mobile sound system that rivals a concert venue, you might be better off looking at a larger, single voice coil unit or a dual sub configuration. The T1D415 will deliver clean, musical bass, but it won't crack a stadium-sized wall. One practical strength that often gets lost in spec sheets is how the sub behaves with different music genres. I tested it with everything from acoustic singer-songwriter albums to heavy metal riffs. The low frequencies in acoustic tracks, like the gentle thump of an upright bass, stayed articulate and didn't get swallowed by the cone's size. With metal, the rapid bass drum hits landed solidly without the muddy effect you sometimes get with smaller subwoofers that try to stretch beyond their capability. The dual 4-ohm configuration also gave me flexibility when wiring. I could run it in parallel for a 2-ohm load to squeeze a bit more power out of my amp, or keep it in series for a more conservative 8-ohm draw if I was concerned about amp temperature. Now, let's talk about who should actually consider buying this sub. If you own a mid-size or compact vehicle, have a moderate-sized trunk, and already have a decent amp, the T1D415 is a solid upgrade that will give you a musical low end without requiring a custom-built box. It also makes sense for car audio enthusiasts who value a clean, accurate bass response over sheer volume. Think audiophiles who love a good road trip playlist and want the bass to complement rather than dominate. On the flip side, if you're driving a full-size truck with a massive cargo area, you probably have space for a larger, single voice coil sub that can push more SPL. Similarly, if you're on a shoestring budget and were hoping to find a sub under $100, the T1D415 sits in a higher price tier, so the cost-benefit analysis might not line up for you. A couple of practical weaknesses are worth flagging before you click Add to Cart. First, the sub's rear-facing mounting points mean you need a sturdy, flat surface at the back of the enclosure, trying to bolt it onto a curved or uneven surface can lead to stress on the frame over time. Second, because the vast cone is larger, the sub can be a tad heavier than a typical 15-inch unit, which means you have to account for extra weight when securing the box, especially in smaller cars where every pound matters for handling. Finally, while the 1-year